So where does water come from? Of course, rain comes down and we get wet and we try to stay out of it sometimes. Um, and it replenishes the earth. We don't get as much of it here in Arizona as we might like at times. But yes, we get water that way. And then there are those lakes a little further up in the mountain that are dammed up, and they collect that water, and it comes down through pipelines, and it feeds us, and it gives us life. Water gives us life. The rains replenish that water to a degree, but what we often miss is the fact that beneath the Earth's surface is a great, massive amount of life-giving water that we call aquifers. Familiar with that word? If you're not a hydrogeologist, maybe it's a little bit new. There are massive amounts of water in and around the top layer of the crust of Earth, and they're often held in permeable rock, the rock and the water working together. But they're also held in huge lakes and pools and underground streams, and just an amazing amount of water. In fact, there are nearly no spots on the globe, including the oceans, where there is not beneath a pool, a huge pool of water. Of course, we access that through ways. We see that water seep, sometimes flow into our world through streams and lakes coming from spring-fed sources. And sometimes it bursts onto the scene in a fountain, in a natural fountain. Sometimes it's heated by hot rock, and we have hot springs, which we bathe in. Today, I'd like to use that metaphor, the aquifer metaphor, to give us an idea about God, because our title today is God is, and all is well. So with that aquifer background, let's turn to God. So what is, or who is God for you? Perhaps you grew up with the idea and the image of God as being a benevolent and sometimes strict and sometimes punishing being, huge, outsized, sitting on a cloud, dictating to who's naughty and who's nice and giving them the rewards or the punishment. But we know as truth students that this is not so, that this is not the God it is. And in fact, we're pointed toward something that's a little less comfortable, even though we have studied truth, and that comfort comes from the idea that there is a caring God, a mother God, or a father God, a nurturing God. But in fact, as we study metaphysics, as I personally reach into my understanding, my knowing, I know that God is not a person. Sometimes that doesn't feel so good, but that God is more than that. God is principle, an unlying, unchangeable truth. Now, God as principle is expressed as good in all of creation. So I compare that idea that God is principle to those aquifers beneath the earth. It's just immutable, unchangeable. It's immense. It's limitless. It's there to provide supply for whatever's need. God is simply there. He's not somebody that waves a magic wand, but it is the very truth of creation that God is. But God can be personal to us as well. And here's the way that God is personal to us. He's personal as I said he. I'm back in that embedded theology, as you can call it. God, the idea, the principle of God is personal to us when we recognize that that principle is within us and expressing out through us. God is not distant in any sense at all, but here, now, within a part of us. In fact, it may be said, as we often do, that we are divine expressions. We are part of the divine. So I would compare that to that life-giving stream that flows where we are at. It's a clear, vital stream that just is right where we're at. It's always there. I think of a cabin in the mountains with a stream flowing by, or a spring that comes up from seemingly nowhere, and we have them here in Arizona in abundance. That life-giving sense is the very thing that right here for me, all the supply that is needed is available. And that's a very personal kind of thing. The idea that the divine expresses through me is a very personal thing. And for me, that's, I experienced that in a unique way. I've done a bit of writing in my time, and I love to write. And as I go back and look at things that I've written in the past, I sometimes say, how did I know that back then? When it's talking about a spiritual topic, I don't think I learned that at that time. How did I know that 5 years ago or 2 years ago? My experience hadn't taken me there yet. I hadn't learned that. I didn't take this course or that course. But I know that that life-giving stream, that supply, that divine energy has come through me in a very personal way. And to me, that feels really good. God is not only principle and personal in an expression through us, but God is infinite supply. It's a spiritual substance that flows to everyone whose faith is fixed on that truth, that God is supply. I would compare this to digging a well, setting your intention on finding water. I remember when my father went out, my father was not very metaphysical, went out with a little divining rod to find out, where do I dig to get the water? Where do I tap into that aquifer? That well, as we set our intention to access that water. The same is true for us who fix our faith on God as supply. So what I'd like us to do today is to use the term divine supply for God. We often use different terms. And today I just would like us to use the word divine supply. So we're going to call God divine supply. So when I think of God as divine supply and me is connecting with that, it's easier for me, human as I am, to think of God as the wellspring from which all good flows. Now, a wellspring, according to Merriam the librarian, is a source of continual supply that bursts or flows forth. I love that idea of the wellspring. I have a wellspring from which continual supply bursts forth or flows forth for me to satisfy those heart's desires that I have. This feels so good to me when I know this. Let me give you an example of that supply that I had the pleasure of seeing. In the middle of the country of Sri Lanka, there is a plain, very flat plain. But in the center of that plain is a huge rock called Alihara Rock. Alihara Rock towers about 500 feet above the plain. It's huge, massive, and it has caves in that rock. Those caves have maybe been inhabited back to prehistoric times. But currently, in that center of Sri Lanka is Alihara Rock and Dambula Temple. On the top of that rock, which is a little bit of a stiff climb to get up there through steps, when I was able to go and visit at the bottom of where the mountain met the plain, where the rock met the plain, there were vendors selling lotus flowers to take along. And I'll give you the idea of the lotus flower in a minute. But because in those caves at the top were 153 Buddha statues. Huge, wonderful, awesome statues. Different positions for the Buddha, reclining, standing tall, sitting in the Buddha, in the traditional Buddha posture. And those Buddhas each had a specific meaning. And for those Buddhists who would go and visit, they would take the lotus flowers and put them at the statue, place them at the statue as an offering, an intention of some sort. I never made it all the way to the top with my lotus flowers because there were also monkeys along the way, and the monkeys loved the lotus flowers, and they simply plucked the lotus flowers right from my hand, and I never got to the top with the lotus flowers. I wasn't keyed in. I didn't know that I had to protect them. But in that cave at the top were those Buddhas. It was simply amazing. They strung through 5 caves, and the history was that a king from the southern part of Sri Lanka had been overthrown and exiled to Alihara Rock and the caves there, and began as an ardent Buddhist to create these statues. He had with him master craftsmen, but he was exiled. It was a fortress for him on this rock, was able to endure. How could he do that? I don't know all the details, but one of the things that was most amazing to me was that there in the top of that 500-foot rock in one of the caves was dripping from the roof of the cave and dropping into a pool a steady, continual stream of water. It must have been that the aquifer beneath that plain had pressurized in some ways, as aquifers can do, and that water was sent up into the very roof of the cave at the top of Alihara Rock, which allowed for life and the continuation of life for those who were sequestered there because of the siege that they were enduring. To me, the Buddhas were magnificent, but just the idea that continual stream of water was there fascinated me, and I loved to that. To me, it was a wellspring, that continual supply, and I stood amazed at it, and only later was able to realize how that can be parallel our understanding of the divine and divine supplies. Well, you're all good truth students, and I'd like to just speak for a minute about the nature of divine supply. We'll do this briefly. You know, it's all good. It's all powerful. It's all present. There is nowhere that divine supply is not. There is no question about the goodness of divine supply. There is no question about the intelligence or the power of divine supply. This is something that we know, something that resonates within me, these qualities that we often refer to. God is, divine supply is, And because of the very nature, the goodness nature of the divine, all is well. There's a gentle Buddhist prayer that I like to recall from time to time. Sometimes I even sing it. May you be filled with loving kindness. May all be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be happy. All of this intention is possible because of divine supply. God is, and all is well. A question, how do I do that? How do I bring my awareness to divine supply, which works itself out in wondrous ways in my life? Well, here's I'm going to suggest that we try it for this week. Let's set the alarm clock. I have an alarm on my phone, but whatever alarm clock you use, set it for one time every day. When that alarm clock goes, take 2 minutes to consciously choose and bring into your awareness the fact that divine supply, all good, all powerful, all intelligent, all loving, divine supply is, and all is well. And so it is. Amen. So as we move on